It began with a whisper just loud enough to be heard within the stone corridors of Windsor. A vault had been opened, a box retrieved, and a royal decision made without fanfare. When word reached insiders that Prince William had authorized the transfer of the Queen Mother's most prized jewels to Princess Charlotte, bypassing Camilla's granddaughters entirely, it wasn't just shocking, it was explosive. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It was an act so steeped in secrecy that not even the seasoned palace aides saw it coming. The records, usually airtight and shielded behind protocols and discretion, reflected a sudden movement of heirlooms long believed to be untouched since the Queen Mother's passing. Among them were emerald tiaras, sapphire brooches, and a diamond-studded necklace she had worn at some of the monarchy's most defining public moments. Items that once defined royal femininity and grace now rested in the hands of a girl not yet a teenager. What made the shock echo louder was who didn't receive them. Camilla's granddaughters, who had quietly grown closer to the heart of royal life under Charles's reign, had been long rumoured to inherit some of these storied pieces. Instead, they were left with whispers and empty assurances. William's motivation, though not officially declared, spoke volumes. Palace insiders claim he moved on instinct and legacy, calling the decision one of symbolic necessity rather than mere inheritance. Behind closed doors, William had grown increasingly vocal about protecting the core of the Windsor bloodline, a mission that now seemed to centre around his daughter. For some, it was a power play cloaked in sentiment. For others, it was the future king drawing a clear boundary between the bloodline of duty and the extended branches of convenience. Yet no one, not even the Queen Consort, had anticipated such a defining gesture being carried out in near silence. Some staff described the moment Charlotte was given the jewels as emotionally overwhelming. Alone with her father, she is said to have been told the significance of each item not in material value, but in the weight they carried across generations. The tiara worn during wartime rallies, the brooch gifted by George VI before a speech that changed Britain's fate, these weren't ornaments, they were symbols of strength, defiance, and feminine power passed through the veins of queens. When Charlotte reportedly asked her father, "Why me?" his reply was quiet but firm, "Because it was always meant for you." With those words, a legacy was reshaped, not with royal decrees or grand ceremonies, but in a hushed exchange that redefined succession in sentiment, if not in law. It didn't take long for murmurs to ripple across the palace. Some called it bold, others deemed it reckless. But one thing was clear, something fundamental had shifted within the monarchy. And though William had said nothing to the press, the message was loud and clear. The Queen Mother's legacy would not pass to outsiders. It would remain within the bloodline she cherished and defended. That Charlotte received the jewels without a whisper to Camilla's household only deepened the quiet storm already brewing. As vaults closed and keys were returned, the silence wasn't peace, it was the calm before something far more volatile. But while the jewels were quietly passed, what erupted behind palace walls was anything but quiet. Behind closed doors, Queen Camilla is said to have erupted. According to insiders, she was staggered by William's decision. A move she considered a personal betrayal and a breach of what she believed was promised during Charles's ascension. What followed was a confrontation that reportedly left even King Charles speechless. It began as a quiet inquiry, one of those deceptively calm questions laced with storm clouds. Why wasn't I told? Camilla, upon discovering the transfer of the Queen Mother's jewels to Charlotte, allegedly confronted her stepson with a ferocity seldom seen behind royal walls. Sources say her voice, usually measured and reserved, trembled with indignation as she demanded answers not only for herself, but for her granddaughters, whom she believed were naturally in line to inherit a portion of the royal legacy. For years, Camilla had worked to position her family within the folds of royal tradition. In her eyes, this wasn't just about diamonds or tiaras. This was about dignity, entitlement, and legacy. William's silence, when met with her fury, only added fuel to a fire already raging in the Queen Consort's heart. Palace aides describe her reaction as unrestrained and emotional. Behind the regal exterior, a woman scorned had emerged, one who had endured decades of scrutiny and sacrifice, now watching as her own lineage was, in her mind, erased from royal inheritance without even a whisper of consultation. What cut deepest was not just the act itself, but the swiftness and secrecy of it. To her, this wasn't just William honouring his daughter, it was a calculated move to solidify the Windsor bloodline and push her own family to the margins. The Queen Mother's jewels had long been whispered about, speculated over, and now they were gone handed to a girl, not even 10 years old, while her own granddaughters were left with nothing but royal photographs and fading smiles. The confrontation reportedly escalated when Camilla confronted William directly. In a private chamber adjacent to Clarence House, what was supposed to be a brief meeting turned into a verbal standoff. Witnesses close enough to hear snippets claimed her words were sharp and unrelenting. She is said to have accused William of rewriting the family, declaring that Charles had once promised a future where both sides of the monarchy, old and new, would be recognised. But William, calm and unmoved, allegedly replied with a simple truth that ended the conversation. The Queen Mother never promised them anything. That sentence, insiders say, broke her. Camilla, stunned and seething, turned to King Charles for support. But instead of backing her, Charles offered little more than a diplomatic murmur. He knew the codicil existed. He knew Anne had reinforced it, and he knew William was merely executing the legacy that had been buried, but never forgotten. When Camilla demanded intervention, Charles reportedly shook his head and muttered, "It's been done." Those 3 words hollowed out any hope she had of reversing the act. In a palace where power is wielded with gloved hands, this was an open wound, one she couldn't hide. Aides later revealed that Camilla stormed out of the chamber in tears, her composure shattered, her pride wounded. For a woman who had weathered decades of public criticism and emerged a queen, it was a moment of unexpected defeat. And while the outside world remained oblivious to the storm brewing inside royal walls, something had permanently shifted within her. She hadn't just lost the jewels, she had lost control over a narrative she thought she had helped shape. As Camilla's fury simmered, the spotlight shifted to the young girl at the centre of it all, Charlotte. She's just a child in the public's eyes, but behind palace doors, Princess Charlotte is being shaped for something far greater. This wasn't merely about jewels, this was about legacy, symbolism, and the quiet moulding of the monarchy's future. And Charlotte's role in it has now become undeniably clear. When Prince William placed the Queen Mother's cherished jewels into Charlotte's hands, it wasn't just an act of inheritance, it was an unspoken declaration of continuity. Behind the scenes, away from the cameras and state portraits, a father made a decision not guided by public expectation, but by instinct, love, and an acute understanding of what the crown needed next. The moment was described as tender, but weighty. William, who once wrestled with his own identity as heir, now stood before his daughter and gave her something more powerful than any title he gave her, a future woven into history. Insiders say Charlotte sat quietly, wide-eyed but composed, as her father explained the story behind each piece, the triumphs, the grief, and the sacrifices of the woman who once wore them. It was during that moment that Charlotte, with the unfiltered honesty of youth, reportedly asked the question that had unsettled even seasoned royals. Why not Lilibet or the others? The room fell into a hush. William's reply, measured but resolute, echoed like prophecy, "Because this is yours." It wasn't favoritism, it was foresight. This decision wasn't rooted in favoritism or rivalry, it was about symbolism. Charlotte wasn't just the middle child of the Cambridge line. She was emerging as the embodiment of continuity, a new face carrying the same fire that once lit the monarchy through its darkest decades. Just as young Elizabeth once stood on the precipice of destiny, so too now stood Charlotte, though her ascent was quieter, more discreet, yet no less deliberate. Sources close to the palace say Charlotte has recently shown a maturity beyond her years. Small but telling signs have emerged. She's reportedly taken on ceremonial rehearsals privately, begun attending internal briefings usually reserved for older heirs, and has even received personal mentoring from Princess Anne, an unspoken endorsement that few outside the bloodline would ever receive. Staff note her ability to listen deeply, respond with grace, and carry herself with an elegance that mirrors the Queen Mother's famed poise. This wasn't a child indulged. This was a child being readied. And so, the jewels weren't just glittering artifacts, they were a rite of passage. The sapphire brooch, once pinned to the Queen Mother's chest as she stood defiant in the Blitz, now rests in a custom case inscribed with Charlotte's initials. A tiara worn during the coronation of a king has now found its next bearer. These heirlooms are less about wealth and more about narrative, one in which Charlotte now plays a pivotal role. Her inheritance is not just what she wears, but what she now carries, the unspoken expectations of a nation, the memory of a formidable matriarch, and the subtle shifting of power beneath the surface. Yet while Charlotte embraced her unexpected inheritance, not everyone in the royal circle remained silent. Buried deep in legal documents, long thought settled, a forgotten clause written by the Queen Mother herself may have unlocked the entire chain of events. A codicil hidden in the estate's fine print, one that mentioned female heirs of Windsor blood, may have changed everything. For decades, the Queen Mother's estate had been treated as a closed chapter, catalogued, archived, sealed with royal wax, and assumed complete. But when a renewed legal review was ordered in light of King Charles's recent administrative audits, something unexpected surfaced. Among the final pages of a thick, dust-covered testament was a codicil, barely a paragraph long, that had been bypassed for its ambiguity until now. In it, the Queen Mother had clearly specified that a select collection of heirlooms, those worn at coronations, wartime broadcasts, and diplomatic summits were to pass, only to female heirs bearing the blood of Windsor. Not by marriage, not by proximity, by blood. The implications were seismic. Camilla's granddaughters, although loved within the family circle, do not share Windsor blood. In the cold eyes of royal tradition, that single fact shifted the balance entirely. Legal experts tasked with reviewing the clause raised concerns, warning that enforcing it could spark controversy and accusations of favoritism. But the palace's private counsel reportedly upheld the codicil as binding, arguing that it was not only enforceable but intentional, crafted by a monarch whose legacy was built on discipline, loyalty, and an unshakable devotion to lineage. What makes the discovery even more compelling is who remembered the clause first. Not a lawyer, not a clerk, but Princess Anne, the Queen Mother's daughter, and perhaps her most faithful defender. Anne, known for her encyclopedic memory and fierce protection of royal heritage, had reportedly referenced a lineal clause during a conversation with William following the jewel handover. That quiet remark sent palace archivists scrambling back into the vault of documents, and when they found it signed in the Queen Mother's own hand, it became the silent dagger that justified William's decision and decimated Camilla's hopes in one stroke. William, upon receiving confirmation, didn't hesitate. Those close to him say he acted swiftly, citing what he called the Queen Mother's intent. He wasn't making a statement, he was honoring a directive. This wasn't about reshaping tradition, it was about preserving it. William's response to critics was reportedly blunt. If we're going to carry the monarchy forward, it must begin with truth. And in this case, the truth lay not in sentiment, but in bloodlines, unforgiving, unapologetic, and sealed in ink decades ago. Palace insiders say this legal revelation created two camps behind the scenes, those who believed it was an overdue course correction, and those who saw it as a deliberate humiliation of Camilla's side of the family. There were whispers that Charles himself had once pushed to reinterpret the Queen Mother's instructions, but the clause had remained tucked away, too delicate to address, too explosive to act upon, until now. And once it was invoked, it became the final word in a debate no one dared publicly acknowledge. The codicil didn't just justify Charlotte's inheritance, it exposed the quiet fault lines running beneath the monarchy's polished surface. It proved that within the royal archives lay time bombs of intention, planted by matriarchs who knew the game far better than those playing it today. And while William emerged as the executor of his great-grandmother's wishes, it was Anne who lit the fuse with a single recollection. But as legal justifications surfaced, so too did deeper family divisions that no document could contain. In the silence following the dual handover, King Charles found himself standing at a dangerous crossroads, torn between his wife's outrage and his son's determination to uphold tradition. What happened next inside the palace shook even the most loyal of staffers. For Charles, the conflict struck deeper than many realized. This was no ordinary disagreement. It was a quiet war between loyalty and legacy, between the vows he made to Camilla and the lessons he once passed on to William. Sources close to the monarch say he initially responded with hesitation and disbelief when the news broke that the Queen Mother's jewels had been transferred to Charlotte without Camilla's knowledge. At first, he questioned the timing, then the process, and finally, the very decision itself. In private, he allegedly demanded answers from his son, hoping, perhaps even expecting, a reversal. But instead of capitulation, he was met with a line that stunned him into silence. "You taught me to honor her, this is me doing that." Those words, spoken without anger but filled with conviction, echoed like a verdict. Caught between a furious queen consort and an unyielding heir, Charles struggled to mediate. At one point, he attempted to consult legal advisors with the hope of challenging the transfer on procedural grounds. But their findings offered no comfort. The codicil unearthed in the Queen Mother's will, the clause binding the jewels to Windsor-blooded female heirs, was airtight. The legal team reportedly warned that any effort to override it would not only be unconstitutional within royal law, but would also appear as an attempt to bend historical legacy for personal appeasement. Charles, always the measured statesman, realized quickly that pursuing that path would fracture more than just family ties. It would splinter the monarchy's credibility. Still, the emotional toll was visible. Insiders say Charles began retreating into private meetings, appearing restless and withdrawn. He spent long hours consulting Anne, the one person who knew the Queen Mother better than any remaining royal. It was during one of these private conversations that Anne, in her unflinching style, laid the matter bare. She reminded her brother of the Queen Mother's fierce desire to keep the family's heirlooms rooted in blood legacy. She reportedly told him, "Mother didn't write that clause for debate. She wrote it to be followed. What was meant to be reassurance felt more like a directive." And that's when Charles made his decision not publicly, but internally. He would not fight William. He would not override the codicil. He would let it stand. That moment marked a quiet surrender, but not for peace, for preservation. Charles, though wounded by the growing distance between Camilla and the institution, understood the consequences of resistance. And in choosing to uphold the codicil, he also chose to isolate the woman who had stood by him for over 5 decades. Camilla, already reeling from William's dismissal and the legal barricade around the jewels, found herself increasingly estranged within the very palace she once believed would shield her family's future. Whispers among staff began to swell. Camilla was being sidelined not by scandal, but by legacy. What had started as a gesture of inheritance had become something far greater. It exposed deep emotional fault lines, a monarchy strained by the friction of generations. Charles stood in the middle, no longer the unifier, but a king forced to choose which future to protect. And while he chose tradition, it came at the cost of the harmony he had spent years building around Camilla's place beside him. As the rift between generations widened, another figure stepped into the shadows to make her voice known, Princess Anne. If anyone held the Queen Mother's wishes close, it was her granddaughter, Princess Anne. Known for her stoic loyalty, Anne broke her silence in a rare, intimate conversation with William, and what she said may have sealed Camilla's defeat forever. In the days that followed the dual transfer, while tempers burned and legal arguments dominated palace corridors, Princess Anne remained quiet but not absent. Her silence wasn't ignorance, it was calculation. When she finally appeared at Kensington Palace, it wasn't with outrage or protest, it was with a small, worn leather envelope clutched in her hand. Inside were personal letters, faded but preserved, written by the Queen Mother during her final years. Letters Anne had kept privately, away from the archives and the royal household. And in one of those letters was a sentence that shifted the entire emotional weight of the controversy. The Queen Mother had written, "There will come a child, not of age or title, but of fire and grace." Charlotte's spirit reminds me of myself. It was not a legal declaration, but a deeply personal one. And to Anne, it meant everything. Anne read the words aloud to William in that private meeting, her voice steady but her hands trembling. The moment didn't require ceremony. It demanded understanding. She told him plainly, "This is what Mother would have wanted." In that room, amid relics of the past and the pressure of the present, a generational bond was solidified not just between Anne and William, but between the Queen, Mother and Charlotte, through the legacy Anne had carried in silence. For William, it was the affirmation he didn't ask for, but desperately needed. And for Anne, it was the final act of loyalty to a grandmother whose vision had outlived her reign. It was Anne's influence, not her title or her history, that tipped the scale. When she later met with Charles behind closed doors, she didn't argue. She reminded. She spoke not only as his sister, but as the custodian of a memory too sacred to twist. She told him of the letter, of the Queen Mother's words, of her unwavering intent. And though Charles had already stepped back from the battle, Anne's presence made the surrender feel like resolution, not retreat. It reframed William's act not as rebellion, but as restoration. The palace noticed the shift. The tone changed. Staff observed that Anne, once a peripheral figure in the early chaos, now stood closer to the core. Her approval gave the move gravity. Her silence gave it dignity. And when Anne was seen leaving a private chapel with young Charlotte days later, no announcement, no fanfare whispers circled through the marble halls. It was more than a visit. It was a passing of something unseen, a blessing, a bond, a legacy carried by a woman who had lived in the shadow of queens, and a girl who one day may wear the crown herself. And in that quiet alliance, Camilla's chances of reversing the inheritance collapsed completely. For what Camilla underestimated was not just the power of bloodlines or legal clauses, but the force of memory. Anne didn't just carry the Queen Mother's blood, she carried her voice. And when she finally chose to speak, that voice echoed louder than any protest could. But while the senior royals found closure, another firestorm was brewing. Camilla's granddaughters were no longer willing to stay silent. They were silent until now. Camilla's granddaughters, usually kept from the limelight, have issued a rare joint statement calling the palace's decision deeply hurtful. Behind the carefully worded press release, insiders claim tears, rage, and talk of distancing from the royal fold altogether. For years, they had stood politely at the edge of the royal photograph present, gracious but never central. Their inclusion was soft-spoken, their appearances always framed as quiet support to their grandmother's rise. But now, after the jewels were handed to Charlotte without so much as a discussion or warning, their silence cracked. The statement came like a whisper laced with venom, graceful in tone but cutting in its implications. "To be erased from history by those we trusted," the statement read, "is a pain that cannot be adorned with jewels." The language was subtle, but the message was thunderous. This wasn't about diamonds. It was about dignity, identity, belonging. The statement ignited a media wildfire. Headlines across tabloids and broadsheets alike questioned the decision, asking if the monarchy was once again favouring bloodline over bonds. Phrases like unjust exclusion and selective legacy began dominating social commentary. Palace insiders noted that the mood turned suddenly combative, with members of Camilla's family expressing a deep sense of betrayal, especially toward Charles, who they once affectionately referred to as Granddad. That relationship, once nurtured through years of quiet support and family dinners, was now reportedly fractured. Sources close to the family claim Charles reached out in an effort to reassure, but it was met with cold silence. The warmth that once flowed privately now felt artificial under the harsh glare of exclusion. Camilla, still reeling from her own diminishing influence, attempted to calm the waters. She sent messages, offered quiet apologies, and even proposed a private reconciliation dinner at Clarence's house. But the damage was done. Her granddaughters, long in the shadows, had finally found their voice, and they weren't prepared to be soothed into silence again. Their anger wasn't just personal. It was generational. They saw the dual transfer not just as a rejection of inheritance, but as a brutal public confirmation of their peripheral status, in a monarchy they had spent years trying to quietly belong to. The palace scrambled. PR advisors urged discretion. Royal aides tried to shift focus to other engagements, but the damage had already settled into the public's imagination. For the first time since Camilla had become queen, the public sympathy shifted slightly, not to her, but to those around her who had been swept aside. The optics were damning. A monarchy preaching modernization but bound by bloodlines, pushing away the very faces it had once embraced. But while this public outcry began to tilt sentiment, something unexpected occurred. Just as the tide threatened to turn against the crown, a revelation from the past resurfaced, something long, buried, and almost forgotten. A chapter from the Queen Mother's personal writings would soon emerge from the shadows, and it didn't just explain everything, it redefined the entire story. But just as public sentiment started to shift, a hidden chapter from the Queen Mother's past was revealed, and it changed the narrative once again. A forgotten diary entry, a photograph lost to time, and a story passed only in hushed tones. The jewel at the heart of the drama, the sapphire brooch, wasn't just a piece of history. It was a gift intended for a young girl who carries the family's fire. That girl, according to new revelations, was always meant to be Charlotte. Long before codicils and legal arguments, before public statements and broken alliances, there was a journal. Tucked between faded pages, in handwriting still strong despite the toll of age, the Queen Mother left behind more than reflections, she left riddles with intent. One such passage, unearthed only recently during a private archival review, changed everything. It described a dream, not of grandeur, not of ceremony, but of a child. "There will come," she wrote, "a girl not born of my time but bearing its spirit. She will stand alone, but she will shine. The fire in her will not be taught, it will simply be." The passage was dated in the final years of her life, and next to it, on a pressed piece of parchment, was a single note: "The brooch shall be hers." The brooch in question had long been revered, a deep blue sapphire set in diamonds, worn during speeches that shaped wartime morale, a talisman of resilience. Until now, no one truly knew its intended fate. It had simply remained in the vault, admired but unassigned. But the diary changed that. The staff present during its rediscovery described the atmosphere as reverent. A few reportedly cried. For those who had served the Queen Mother, the passage wasn't merely poetic, it was prophetic. And suddenly, William's decision to give it to Charlotte wasn't controversial. It was fulfillment. When William read the entry, palace aides say he went completely still. For a man known for composure, the moment broke through. He is said to have asked for the room to be cleared. Minutes later, when he emerged, his face carried a weight that could not be described, only felt. The brooch was no longer a choice. It was a duty. And his daughter, still young but growing under the same watchful eyes once cast on her great-grandmother, had become the thread that connected past to present. Charlotte was shown the diary entry in private. What happened in that room has not been officially confirmed. But one detail has been quietly shared by a source close to the family. After reading the Queen Mother's words, Charlotte looked up and whispered, "Then I will carry it right." It wasn't a child's response, it was a vow. In that single moment, the controversy faded into legacy. The brooch was never about who was excluded. It was always about who was chosen. Those who had questioned the fairness of the jewel's transfer were now confronted with something deeper than legal documents or royal precedent. They were confronted with intent carved in ink and memory by a woman who had known what it meant to protect the crown through fire and silence. And that intent had never been directed at Camilla's side of the family. It had always been waiting for Charlotte. And yet, even with the mystery seemingly resolved, one final twist was about to make headlines. In an act steeped in symbolism, Prince William is reported to have written a confidential letter to Charlotte, sealed, time-stamped, and set to be opened on her 25th birthday in 2046. The contents remain unknown, but those close to William say it's the key to understanding everything. One insider called it his final lesson, his deepest truth. The letter is locked in the royal archives under restricted protocol, wrapped in layers of security, both physical and ceremonial. Only Charlotte and the reigning monarch at the time will be permitted to open it. No advisors, no historians, no courtiers. It is a moment already prepared for, decades in advance. The envelope, bearing William's personal crest and the Queen Mother's embossed initials beneath it, is a deliberate final gesture in a saga defined not by drama alone, but by legacy, secrecy, and purpose. What William placed inside that envelope is known to no one, but those who witnessed his demeanor the day he submitted it say his eyes were red, his voice low, and his words to the archivist were chilling in their simplicity. This will explain it all. Speculation has grown rapidly within the palace and among the royal press. Some believe the letter includes a full explanation of his decision to transfer the Queen Mother's jewels to Charlotte, not as an apology, but as a roadmap to understanding his vision for the monarchy's future. Others believe it may reveal deeper truths, fractures within the family, unspoken betrayals, or even a personal request that Charlotte uphold certain traditions or make choices that would solidify her place in royal history. Whatever it contains, it has already become legend, a ticking narrative bomb quietly waiting to go off. The palace has confirmed the existence of the letter but has refused to disclose even the smallest detail regarding its contents. "It is a private matter," was the only official statement given. But behind palace gates, there is no doubt this letter is not merely a keepsake. It is a crown without a jewel, a promise without words, a father's voice frozen in time. Those who have seen Charlotte since the letter was sealed describe her as different, still young, still vibrant, but quieter, as if she knows a weight awaits her, a future only she has been entrusted to carry. And as history has often shown with the House of Windsor, silence carries power, and secrets, when finally spoken, reshape destiny. Because in the House of Windsor, jewels carry more than sparkle, they carry power, memory, and the weight of the crown itself. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.